Well, good morning and welcome. I want to begin a little bit with an apology that I have hijacked your Bible study today, and so if you did not remember or hear the message or pay attention to what I said, in structuring the message, you think about this fact of, okay, we've got this issue of the problem of suffering and evil, and our scripture passage is dealing with this, and it's giving us strong reason for hope, and yet there becomes this question and objection, especially that is something of an objection that comes in. It started in the 1800s, but then in the 20th century and the 21st century, you can basically say that the question about belief in God in the face of evil and suffering has become perhaps the question of our age, as far as just the objection to the idea of God. Now, there's one person who, Alistair McIntyre, who's a philosopher, and he basically says that the God that people rejected in the 19th and 20th century was the God they created in the 17th century, and that's where in the 17th century you really began to have the rise of deism, and so he's the grand clockmaker, and he's high and distant, and he doesn't really care about us or want a personal relationship. He just makes a perfect system, winds it up, and lets it go. And evil and suffering has a really hard time in a perfect system, and so there is something to that historically, when you deal with the problem of evil, it does not emerge until basically the 1800s. I mean, now in a sense, this is where the book of Job is a wrestling through this, but it's not sitting there saying that God cannot exist in the face of suffering and evil, which is the modern objection. So, I in my first attempt at my sermon, I tried just to deal with that a little bit, but then there was no way that I was going to get a message down into a half hour, deal with that with any sense of adequacy, and then really get into what the main topic needed to be, which was bringing out of the text this idea that God really is in control, that he's working his great purposes, and to trust in that. So the suggestion was made, and I thought that it was a worthy thing, so we're doing something a little bit different. If you're joining with us live online, I want to say welcome. Today in our Bible study, we're going to deal with the problem of evil, and I hope you're ready. I really do think this is an important question. I'm going to pray for us, and then I'm going to state one way of the problem, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some wisdom if you're dealing with people who maybe are bringing this objection, and then we'll start breaking down and addressing it. Loving Heavenly Father, give thanks for this morning, and thank you that you want us to wrestle with you, and that you are the absolutely good God who loves us and stands against evil. And yet, you are allowing it to be present for a time. And in that tension of what your purposes are, and then just how horrific evil can be, Lord, you know that it creates problems. You have even felt this problem, and so, Lord, as we wrestle through, as we come to understand both a little bit of the mystery of your will, and then the affirmation of who you are, may we be blessed in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm gonna first just state this problem the way that J.L. Mackie, who wrote the book The Miracle of Theism, which was actually an objection against the beliefs of theism, that how could anybody believe this system? Theism is a way of addressing in a more philosophical way the idea of a personal creator God who is all-powerful, all-knowing. Theism is just a Greek word in English deriving from God. Most, the major world religions today outside of Hinduism and Buddhism are monotheistic. And so Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, you'll hear that theism, theistic in that, polytheistic. But theism is kind of more of a way of really talking from a philosophical standpoint of this idea of a personal creator, agent God, usually all-powerful, all-knowing. Here's the objection in a nutshell. If a good and powerful God exists, he would not allow pointless evil in the world. But because there is much unjustifiable, pointless evil in the world, the traditional good and powerful God cannot exist. And simple argument, if this, then this, and since this is true, then this must be true. And for us as Christians, we hear this, and a couple of the things in this statement, we have to say, well, even while he's talking generally about a theistic God, this does line up with the God of the Bible. God is all-powerful. He is all-knowing. He is the creator of everything. And then I'll throw in a little bit of the mystery of biblical revelation here. He's the creator of everything, but he's not the author of evil. So, if you're out in the world, and and it could be family, it could be friends. It's altogether possible that you're going to, at some point, have the opportunity to really minister to somebody who's struggling with the evil in their life and even wrestling with God in the midst of it. And at the outset, this is where, in my experience, most people who struggle with the problem of evil, and they're really struggling with the problem, it's not the intellectual arguments that is the big thing that they're holding on to. It is more of the personal experience and the frustration. And so if you jump quickly into the intellectual arguments, you may do more harm than good. And this becomes part where, in the end, what you find is God not answering the question of the problem of evil, but giving us resources to trust in him and to know that he is there with us, and even to experience his presence there. So, I think we're gonna have a little time to spend in Job. And in the end, what you get in the book of Job is that ultimately God shows up, and he doesn't get his questions all answered, but God is enough. And there's a part where what that person may need, much more than just a philosophical answer to the objections over the problem of evil, is maybe even God's presence mediated through you, where here's somebody with empathy and care. And so there's this part when you come into this where it's like, okay, so the intellectual response dealing with the arguments is actually pretty easy. And so then if you learn it, you're equipped. And then you're going to want to use it. But if you use it too quickly, or if you use it in the wrong situation, it has the potential of doing more harm. So what you really want to do is, first of all, you want to listen and understand where people are coming from. And you want to cultivate a sense of empathy. Hear their problem, listen. And again, I'll point to Job in this. He had 3 friends who came and sat with him for 7 days while he mourned. If you're dealing with somebody who has a real question, they're why God, why? Don't sit there and come back and say, Well, really what God's doing here is that this is the pathway to the best of all possible worlds. So evil is necessary for a time, but it will all be done away with and everything's going to be okay. And we'll all be able to look back on it and feel really good that God allowed the best of all possible worlds. That just is, people are going to probably say, could you please leave now? I just like you to leave now. In that listening, you want to listen for their passions, and how they're hurting. And you also want to listen for their presuppositions. And what I mean by that is, what's their starting points? And so what we're called to meet people where they are. If, as you're listening, what you're experiencing as you listen is, wow, these people are weird, I have no idea what they're talking about, you will struggle to have empathy for them. Which means that you need to keep listening until you have some understanding of their story before you really try to engage in ministry to them. If you're not coming from a place where they feel like there's connection, it probably won't go well. Also remember this. As you're talking with somebody, you don't want to get in a place where it's an argument with a winner and a loser. You want to try to come alongside, and that really helps with questions. Tell me what you're going through. Tell me what your problems are. I even did this a little bit on Sunday in the message where, in talking about empathy, sometimes we can surprise people. That they're mad at God, this injustice has happened, where are you? And we can come alongside and we can say something like, I think that's unfair. I think that's unjust. I mean, if I was in your situation, I might be questioning, where is God in the midst of this? Or, and if it's in your story, I have done that before. I mean, I know this is hard. And that becomes a much different situation than the adversarial, okay, let me prove to you that as a Christian, I really know what I'm talking about and you're wrong. And then, with the problem of evil, remember that there are elements of our Christian faith that are truly mysterious. And what I mean by that is that there is so much truth here, no human mind can hold it all together. And I would argue that it would seem that in the problem of evil and suffering, we are touching upon mystery here. And I made one allusion to it just a moment ago. God is the creator of everything, and yet he is not the author of evil. And there is no evil in him. Well, if he's the creator, how does that work? This must be a little bit more convoluted, complicated than I thought. Let's look at this a little bit. Okay, so if a good and powerful God exists, he would not allow pointless evil in the world, but because there is much unjustifiable pointless evil in the world, the traditional good and powerful God must not exist. The underlying argument, if he is a good and powerful God, he would not allow pointless evil in the world, but because there is pointless evil in the world, this God cannot exist. Now, Mackey's argument is actually not the best argument, as far as against the problem of evil, because one of his assumptions in this argument is that because I believe it's pointless, it must be pointless. And that's something where, okay, as a finite human being who has a limited understanding of reality, and to sit there and to say, well, an all-powerful, all-knowing God couldn't have a point of how to use this because I can't see it, is just pretty arrogant and presumptive. Now, just because somebody is irrational, or they bring up an argument that really is not a very logically consistent argument, doesn't help you when you're dealing with the individual. And so part of the reason I start here is just to realize sometimes you're going to run into inconsistencies with this stuff. And so then that becomes something where, you listen to it and you kind of go, oh. So what you're saying is that, this has to be pointless. There can't be any reason that anybody would allow something like this to ever exist. And you can't see it right now, but is it possible that, sometimes you've been in your life where you don't see the reason for something, but then later on you see the reason for something? And this becomes one of the places where the argument itself is easy to knock down from a logical standpoint. Unless you're all-knowing and you know everything, then you really can't claim that I'm absolutely sure that this is pointless. Second thing to say about this is, and this is an interesting one, and this is actually there's been work that's been swirling around this. So the argument goes like this. There is no way that you can have an all-knowing, all-good, all-powerful God and to allow for this pointless evil. So God must not exist. But then, here becomes the question mark. If you let go of the idea that there is no God, then how do you claim something is truly evil? Because ultimately, the idea of a moral system, a right and wrong, if there is no creator who has divine purpose, who establishes the nature of the universe, then everything is here apart from a creator God. It's all just random chance. There has been no, and I'll put it this way, and then I'll talk about the fact that there are attempts to do this today. But what philosophers have understood is that if we live in a completely materialistic world and there is no God, how do you get from is to ought? How do you get from what is to what ought to be? And you can only really talk about evil and right and wrong in a system where there is ought, where there is purpose, where there is design, where there is meaning. If I make something and I make it, I'll get it very concrete. I made a swimming pool, and the purpose of the swimming pool is to hold water that you want to swim in. And so within the midst of that, it means that there's a number of things that have to be working together in order to make that system work well. The thing that you build has to hold water. Now, you build it, and if it doesn't do what you intended to do, then something is wrong. So, when you bring agency in, when you bring design in, when you bring purpose in, then we can start talking about what is right and wrong. But if there is no design, if there is no purpose, and I'll use another kind of loose analogy for this. Okay, so a bunch of kids are together at a park, and they're there playing. One child wants to do one thing, another child wants to do another thing. Who gets their way? Well, if you're not there for a purpose, if you're just there, then let everybody do what they want to do. Otherwise, but this is where the system really comes in. Because enforcing something on those kids in that situation, making them do something where there wasn't, that starts to get coercive, and that would be wrong. But we could only say that in any system where there's actually right and wrong. Otherwise, it's all just preference. And ultimately that becomes the this issue where when somebody says, this evil is so terrible and wrong, there's no way that God can exist in the face of this evil. So God doesn't exist now, but this evil that was so terrible and wrong, how do you actually say it's terrible and wrong? Because there's no basis of morality. Everything is here by chance. What you're really saying is it's personal preference. I just really, really don't like it, so I don't think anybody else should be able to do this. But that's not morally persuasive. And so what ends up happening is the very reality of evil, we're gonna dig into this a little bit more, but I just want to kind of talk about it at this level for a moment. The very reality of evil ultimately helps point you back to God. Because if you want to say this isn't just something I don't prefer, but the genocide of an entire people is wrong, and it's not just wrong because I don't like it, but it's wrong no matter what, then that's pointing you back to the idea that there is some universal standard of right and wrong that something should be. Now, we can't prove any of this with absolute certainty. I mean, this is the part where we end up being in a story that requires faith. But there is this strong element that if everybody lives this way, if nobody can't live this way, then, and C.S. Lewis famously said, if ducks if ducks, like the little animal, the duck, if it has all of these features that are geared towards swimming, just because you don't see water at the time doesn't mean that water doesn't exist. When you start to see something where everything seems to be pointing to a place for it, there's a good likelihood that it exists. Even stronger, if at some point every human being has this gut level reaction feeling that this isn't just my preference, but this is wrong and it should be. We may disagree on what those things are, but the very reality of it points to the idea that there is aught out there. Some simple ones. The molestation of children, the sexual molestation of children is evil and wrong, and it should never be done. Now, some hardcore people, who don't want to point to the idea of a lawgiver will sit there and say, well, I mean, we feel like it's really, but and yes, we maybe we have a system, but it becomes something where it's like, now the reality is that there are some people who perpetrate that evil, right? But, and I'll pick on Hitler for this, but even Hitler had a dog. I mean, it's like this part where it's just like people are inconsistent. They do some evil things over here. They do some loving things over here. And so you come at this and it's like, okay. But this begins to kind of sit there and say, okay, we're wrestling through this. We have these experiences. I can't prove it like I can prove 2 + 2 = 4. But nothing in life that's really worthwhile can be proved like 2 + 2 = 4. But in this, I'm sure there's some people out there, but of yet I have not met anybody who is a thorough relativist who doesn't come at some point and say there are some things that are just absolutely wrong. It's not just my preference, it's for everybody. I once had the chance to debate somebody, and it was in a panel discussion, and somebody was bringing forward this relativistic argument that there are no moral absolutes, and everything is just personal preference. And the interesting thing was they were an atheist, but they were a Jew. And so I said, I'm not trying to be mean, but do you think what Hitler did to the Jews in World War II was wrong? Yes. Yeah, but your system, you can't say that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And she saw, you know, I mean, you know, and it kind of popped a little bubble, you know, because there's reasons why people want to move away from, say, you know, like why relativism and people in our culture say, you know, all truth is relative and there are no absolutes. It's because they don't want to have some moral absolutes, because they don't want to have a lawgiver who gives those moral absolutes. Now, this is about, I think this is about right. About 20 years ago, you began to have a new movement, and it's kind of actually fizzled out, and it was called the New Atheism. And there were people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens who started writing some books. And they were they were kind of a new breed of atheists because they were on the attack against organized religion. Organized religion is an evil. It needs to get wiped out. It is a virus that infects humanity. And so they took this approach. And as they went out into the debates, and you know, God Delusion by Richard Dawkins is one of them. A Letter to a Christian Nation is another one. I think that was by Sam Harris. What I would say is that they were falling into the Alistair McIntyre trap that the God that they were rejecting was basically a God that I would reject too, because it was a creation of the deistic God of the 1700s over and against a really robust biblical Christianity. A lot of their arguments that go against Christianity are basically against a pretty shallow version of Christianity. But in all of this, one of the things that they kept running into was the problem of evil, and they want to use the problem of evil against Christianity. Look, how can you believe in a God who allows these sorts of things to happen? And then it would come back. And let me read for you testimony from C.S. Lewis about his own experience, because this is part of how he changed from being a hard-boiled atheist to a believer. My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got to this idea of just and unjust? What was I comparing the universe with when I called it unjust? Of course, I could give up my idea of justice by saying it has nothing but a private idea of my own, but if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. For the argument depended on saying the world was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my private fancies. Consequently, atheism turns out to be too simple. And what he realizes is that the only way that he could really say that evil is fundamentally that there is truly right and wrong, and the only way that you could get to truly right and wrong is if there is a creator God who creates this universe with purpose and design, and then we are going against the grain of the universe when we do acts of evil and immorality. And then it's wrong by definition because it goes against the will of the creator. Now, the things like that happened for the new atheists. They were feeling pretty good about themselves. They bring out these arguments, and then so there has actually been an attempt. Sam Harris is the most famous one for doing this, of trying to create an absolute basis of morality without belief in any God or anything. It's just a material system. And it's kind of an interesting thing. And people can believe in it. But basically what he does is he starts with three axioms that he says, well, here's three things that we could all agree upon. And you know, I wish I had a stool at this point that has three legs. But you know, typically when you want to start to construct something, if you can have three legs, you begin to have a basis of foundation. It's not going to tip over. But in the end, what they do is that they're saying we're going to create 3 axioms, 3 universals that we'll all agree on, even though we're sitting here and saying that there are no universals. And so basically, I'm building a stool in the air that's not sitting on anything, but because I can have this stool that's sitting here in the air, you can stand on that. But what are you standing on? Well, I'm not standing on anything. I'm just basically creating something. And in the end, it's like, well, how can that not be a preference?
Right.
Well, it is. How can you not be actually having faith? Well, actually, you are. It takes faith not to believe in God, and sometimes it takes more faith not to believe in God than to actually believe in God. Because it's like, I got here, and I didn't need you, and it's like, well, you didn't get here all by yourself.
Right.
But it feels like I did, and we'll talk to your parents, see if it felt like that to them. So, let me see here. I'll stop there for a moment, and I haven't tried to get too deep into the philosophical weeds yet with this. I know if I'm talking about moral relativism, absolutes, and all of that, at some level I am. Questions? Are you tracking with me? No questions?
Well, it's a little verbose, but we're hanging in there.
Okay, I needed to hear that. What I'll do now is I will give you a version of what's called the free will defense. And typically when you're dealing with the question of the problem of evil, on the intellectual side of things, it does revolve around the fact that if God is all-powerful, and God is all-knowing, and God is all good, and there's evil, something's got to give.
Yeah.
And so then you walk through it and it says, well, maybe you Christians need to give up one of your convictions. Maybe he's not all-knowing. Maybe evil snuck up on him. And so, so that becomes something where it's like, okay, well, if he wasn't all-knowing, then this could be the part where, okay, there's evil. And it may be that if he's not all-knowing, then ultimately he's going to overcome evil. But you can't say that he's all-knowing, all-powerful and all good, and then let evil be there. Well, maybe he's not all-powerful, and maybe he's a victim of evil just like all of us. Or maybe he's not all good. And this becomes, as people are wrestling through this. Now, remember, this is the part where it's just like, there are horrific things, terrible. There are things that this is you and I, we should act. It is wrong. It is terrible. It should not be. This is disgusting. This is gross. This is hard. But within this is the part where it's like, okay, so in this system, it's like, okay, so all-knowing, all-powerful, all good, but evil exists, therefore God doesn't exist. However, in that simple argument, there is room to add some premises. What if God has a higher purpose, so he allows evil to exist for a time? So, if I can add some information into what you're seeing, and this would become, we technically call this a theodicy, and that word is that we're defending belief in God, we're defending God's position. God's in the dock. Now, interestingly, because I want to end with the book of Job. Job begins with a courtroom scene up in heaven. And in some ways, Satan is accusing God, well, he is accusing God, that, really the only reason anybody glorifies you is just because of all the benefits. And if you took away all the benefits, And God says, consider my servant Job. He's very righteous. And so there is even a biblical basis of saying, God presents himself in such a way that you can make accusation against him. Be cautious, but you can. I mean, you can wrestle with him. It's okay. In this theodicy where you're sitting there and you're defending, we are now then presenting evidence. And so what we're going to say in this is that, okay, so you've got these three premises, and you and I all have to admit to them, because this is a picture of the biblical God. God is all-knowing, he is all-powerful, and he is all good. The other thing that we also have to admit is there is such a thing as evil, and God is opposed to it, and it is absolutely wrong. But our understanding of the world is a little bit more complicated than what you've put forward, so let me add a little bit more information. It is possible that there could be some justification, and when I use that justification now, this is me setting a theodicy. I'm justifying God's actions. For us to trust in this all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good God, even in the face of evil. And it would be and that is that God has sufficient purpose to allow evil to exist. Now, we can keep it that simple. Ultimately, what we're going to argue is that he's only allowing it to exist for a time. So, this free will defense, by the way, is a philosophical argument, and Alvin Plantinga is one of the main people who have developed this argument. He is one of the more significant philosophers of the 20th century, and this is the part where a little known secret is that in the late 20th century and into the 21st century, there have become a number of significant Christian philosophers who have made strong cases for belief in God and presented reasons for understanding Christian theism throughout the philosophical academy. So in the realm of philosophy, there are a number of very respected Christian philosophers who are writing, publishing, and defending ideas. And we don't typically hear about that but that's something. And Alvin Plantinga is one, and this free will defense is something that has come up in the whole discussion of the problem of evil. That is a very strong argument. So, if I can bring you reasons for why he would allow this, then you can't just sit there and say that this is impossible. I've justified the possibility that he has sufficient reason. Now, let me ask you a couple of questions. If you had a world where there was no love and no freedom, possible, could that world be better than a world with love and freedom?
No. No.
And most people will admit that to have a world that has love and freedom, it is categorically better than a world where there is no love and there is no freedom. And this is about both personal agency and personal meaning. And so you start with that basis, and then you say, okay, so what if the only possible way that God could create a world where love and freedom are possible is a world that allows for the possibility of evil? But if you were to create a world where there was no love and no freedom, then and evil does not exist, that world would not be as worthwhile, as significant, as important as this world over here. And then the argument gets even a little bit deeper, because there's this. If freedom is a necessary component of love, if coercion, where you force people, is actually unloving, then what that means is that if you allow for both freedom and love, that freedom means real freedom. And it means freedom for the possibility of evil, not just good. And if freedom is going to be freedom, it has to be free. And so our argument is that our God was looking to create, and this is where it gets a little philosophical, the best of all possible worlds. And we're not there yet, but we're on the way there. And that best of all possible worlds is a world where love abounds and freedom abounds, but nobody ever chooses evil. And that is actually the Christian hope. But we're not there yet. And we're now in this place where that's God's ultimate purpose. But to get there, what he's had to allow to do is allow for evil to have its place for a time in this system, even though he's not the author of evil. But because he's allowed for freedom, then that freedom has brought in the reality of evil. The only way that you could get there, or the only way that you could have love, is if you allow for that real possibility. And that seems to be the case of what's happened in our universe.
Well, the shortcoming is not his, it's ours, because we're broken.
Now, the part of the strength of this philosophical argument, there's sufficient reason to allow for evil. A world where there is love, a world where there is freedom, is better than a world where there is no love and there is no freedom. But it also,
those are the only two choices, right?
well, we are simplifying it down, but the reality is can you conceive of a world that is categorically better, but love does not exist, than a world where love exists? And so that becomes the part where, at the very center of our experience, this experience of love is paramount. And then also for us human beings, this very same argument for freedom. If you're just all autonomous, if there is no free choice, if you really aren't a personal agent, does that sound like a better world than where there is real freedoms, where there are personal agents? And then you bring those two things together, and then you sit there and say, but real freedom means the possibility of. And so then the part of the power of this argument is also how well it lines up with the biblical story. Right? Because we can sit there and we can say, okay, God came in and he gave them freedom. Now, when we get into this, there's a little bit of the nuance to say, it's not absolute freedoms, but it's true freedoms. And especially when it comes to the inner self of the will and choices. And then, you lean into it and you say, coercive force to force somebody to love you, that's not really love, that's rape. And so where you are free to truly love means that you are actually free. And it means that you're free not to love. And now we start to have an explanation of from whence does evil come. So this free will defense and this argument where you bring, and notice the free will defense. Okay, I know the point. All-knowing, all-powerful, all good, but evil exists. But God created a world where there's freedom. And he created that world for love. And you bring those two things together. And now what we would say is, in the simplest form, to remember it in your minds, is we believe that is sufficient cause for all the evil and suffering that you see. But we also have hope. It's not always going to be this way. There is a pathway through this where you can get to the best of all possible worlds. it is possible that you can be absolutely free and always choose to do good. Just so you know, we're going to get there one day.
Not yet.
Not yet. Part of our reason part of our reason that we don't choose the good is because we don't see things well. We are tempted to believe that some evil things are actually good. But if we saw it clearly, every time God said no, we would just accept it absolutely. And this is my great analogy. I've learned a healthy respect for electricity. And I have no temptation whatsoever to grab a fork and stick it into a live socket. It's just, you would have to force me to do something like that. I just know that that is the stupidest thing to do in the world out of experience. So, this is the part where it's like, oh, man. So I have a healthy respect for electricity, and around it, I know that there's certain ways to act and there's certain ways not to act. And so I'm going to act in the ways that are appropriate. And I'm not sticking a fork. No, I didn't stick a fork. It was a screwdriver. Now, there was a story to this, which is that I was finishing my basement, and the electrician had marked the things on the panel as the basement, and I had turned them all off. And then I went downstairs with my little flashlight holding in my mouth, and I'm sitting there, and I get zapped. And actually, I started with, I turned off that room. And so then I went down and I got zapped. And then I went upstairs and then I turned off all the ones for the basement. And I went downstairs and I got zapped. And so then I went upstairs and I told my wife, I said, that's it. Everything's going off. We're not going to have any power for a little bit. I'm not getting zapped again. And then I flipped the switch and then I went downstairs and then I stuck it in there and I did not get zapped. But the point of this, though, is that I know that would be a stupid thing to do. And so there is no temptation in me whatsoever. And at some point, you and I are going to come to this place where we see and understand all that sin is. And in the life to come, we will be absolutely free, but we will never choose to do evil because we will see it for what it is. We're not there yet, but we're on the way there. That's the Christian hope. And so it is conceivable to say that it was the necessary pathway to create the best of all possible worlds, where it is a universe that has freedom and love, but no evil, has to first go through a pathway where evil exists for a time. Seems to line up with the biblical story. That's the free will defense. That's kind of the best standard argument, is when we come into this. If you're just dealing on the rational level and you want to deal with logic. Now, let me say a couple of things on this. Nowhere does the Bible actually give us that argument. It actually, it refuses to answer the question, from whence does evil come? If you go to Scripture and you sit there and you say, okay, where does evil come from? Well, you know what our first story is, right? Well, the serpent's already there, who's Satan, and he's already at work trying to tear down God's good creation. So where does Satan come from? The Bible never answers that question. Now, Christian tradition, we'll go back and read actually two different sections of prophecy. Isaiah was one of them, where it talks about the son of the morning star. And people said, well, maybe this is the story of Satan's fall. Could be, but we don't know. It doesn't say it definitively. Instead, what we're given, and there's more, actually, the most important thing that we're given is we're given the cross of Christ. And in the face of the evil of the world, what God does is he allows the evil to come to him, and he absorbs it all, and then he overcomes it. And then if you want to kind of, and this is the part where what we need more than anything else in the face of evil and injustice is we need Jesus. And that's pretty simple, and it's also really good, and it's absolutely true. You want to wrestle through this a little bit more, you go to the book of Job. And the book of Job is this place of wisdom. And what we often miss about the book of Job is the very structure of how this is. It's a wisdom book. It comes in the section of Scripture that's called the writings. It's intended to help, just in its very place where, this revelation comes to us, is this is intended to help you practically understand how to live in the world. Wisdom. And it has a very unique place within the corpus of Scripture. If you read through the Torah, very clearly there is establishment of retributive justice. God is a God of justice, and he is going to uphold a standard of justice. And so if this happens, then you can expect this is going to happen. Now, if you're a student of the Bible, you know that has had a very strong impact upon anybody who becomes people of the book. So that when we get into the New Testament, we can very obviously see, for example, like John, I believe it's John chapter 9, where you have the man who was born blind, and then the disciples come in and they say, "Who sinned, this man or his parents?" Because somebody sinned here, because this is why he's suffering. And you see this very straightforward equation: if then. If they're suffering, then there was sin. And and that makes sense, right? I mean, the reason their suffering came into the world is because of sin. But what does Jesus say? Neither this man nor his parents, but this happened so that the glory of God might be revealed. Whoa. This is a little more complicated. The book of Job is some of the wisdom that says, probably in about 85 to 90% of all situations, retributive justice is going to go a long ways in helping you say who's at fault. Most people's problems are of their own creation. But it's a little more complicated because it's not always the case. Sometimes it has nothing to do with them and what they've done. Now, if you want a clean black and white world where you have total control and predictability, that just grates against you to no end. What? But we all know this, because we all said it to our kids: life is not fair. That's the book of Job, just so you know. So what happens in the book of Job is the opening scene, which is this courtroom scene in heaven where Satan comes in and he makes accusation. And remember, Satan means accuser. And the very language of it is this courtroom. God is a God of justice, and he's going to do what is right. And so the accuser comes to level accusation. Consider my servant Job. Oh, well, if he wasn't so comfortable, if you didn't bless him so much, if life was hard, he would curse you and he would not be faithful to you. Now, what's interesting about this is that the entire structure of this is something where when you're looking at it, it's like, do you know that God puts his reputation on the line with Job? And he says, no, you can test my servant. He's going to prove faithful. Let's see who's right. Let's see who's wrong. Me or Satan. And the rest of the story of Job has no idea that happens. He just experiences life. And that life, it gets ripped out from under him. And he experiences suffering. Well, first, he experiences loss, children, wife, wealth. And then the only reason that he's still faithful to you is because he himself hasn't suffered. Okay, so now he suffers. And then we see this. This is hard. And for 7 days he sits there and mourns. Now, what often gets missed then is this part, the very structure of it. So he has 3 friends who come to him, and they sit with him for 7 days, which is really good idea. And then it goes downhill from there. And what happens after those 7 days is that they start to say, okay, Job, all you need to do is you need to confess your sin because you've done something wrong. And this is why the bad things are happening to you. And we all know that you've done something wrong because this is what Scripture says. And so just confess that sin and then everything will work itself out. And Job's like, no, I haven't done anything wrong. Oh, no, Job, you really have. And for 34 chapters, his miserable comforters are level attack after attack after attack, saying, Job, just don't be so stubborn. It's you. Now, what's interesting about this is that you and I, as the readers, know that he is not suffering because of something that he's done. And so we know that this is more complicated. There's this epic battle going on, and Job is part of it. And God's sitting there and saying, no, there are those who will be faithful, and here is somebody, and he's going to be faithful. And then there's an interesting part because then there's Elihu who comes, and he's a younger person, and he's the typical younger person who sits there and thinks, all you old folks don't really know, so let me clarify it for you. But he's he's naive and stupid as well. So you're reading through this, and then finally it gets to this place where Job really is finally tempted to just complain to God and say, this is your fault. I know it's not my fault. And then God comes down and confronts him and brace yourself like a man. And were you there and do you know? And it's this thing that my ways are higher than your ways and there's bigger things going on. And so just take your place, young man, because, don't attack me in this. Now, in the end, though, what ends up happening is that Job never gets an answer to his question. He never knew what was going on, but he remained faithful. And so the book of Job comes to us and invites us in. There's going to be times in your life where what you're experiencing is of your own creation. And the evil, and this is the part where there's so many things that we blame God for that when we look at it, that really starts with human agency, right? But there are going to be those times where life is unfair and you're not going to be able to figure out what have I done, and you're not going to be able to repent from it. And Job invites us in to say, but whatever, don't blame God for it, but don't assume that God doesn't care or he's not at work. In fact, maybe, just maybe, you remaining faithful in the midst of this suffering may bring glory to God. There may be, and this is the congruence between Old Testament and New Testament, and even that this ringing truth that's all through the Scriptures with evil and suffering. God does some of his best work right here. And while it's truly evil, and it is not good, God's at work, and he's even using this to bring about good things. And some of his best work in you is what you go through in the midst of suffering and hardship to become more of who God created you to be. And so it's not going to be absolutely meaningless. God's going to bring some good from it, even while at the very same time that thing was wrong. And so in the story of Job, in the end, he gets a double portion, more kids, more wealth, more land, and it's a sign to us. And even more importantly, we come into the New Testament, and I'm hitting my mark on this so well because we've got 2 minutes left. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kind. And we are invited into the New Testament to see these things as opportunities for character growth, because the pathway of growth actually cuts right through suffering. And so that is a longer response to this. Were there any questions about this?
That's good.
Okay, let me close this in prayer. Dear Lord, I thank you for the fact that you are for us and that you are with us and that you give us promises. Thank you that we can say that evil is evil and that you are not the author of it, that we actually have a hope that that one day there will be no more suffering, no more death, no more sin, no more tears of anguish. But in fact, you will come and you will wipe all of these away. And we will be able to look back, and even the scars that we experienced in this life will in some way become beautiful and glorious. That's just how amazing you are in the face of the evil of this world. And we want to pray, Lord, both to help us when we go through it, to be prepared, to find strength, to have faith, but also just to remember that what we need more than anything else is not just an answer, but what we need is you. Pray for this in Jesus' name. Amen.